The air inside the Capitol hearing room was thick, so thick it felt like you could slice it with a knife. Bright lights beamed down like interrogation lamps. Cameras zoomed in, fingers on record buttons. This wasn't just another political hearing. This was theater. And everyone knew it. Across the long, polished table sat Caroline Leavitt, press secretary to President Donald Trump, spine straight, eyes like twin blades of glass. She wasn't just present, she commanded the space. Opposite her, lounging like a cat ready to pounce, was Senator Adam Schiff. His smirk? Pure provocation. His posture? Arrogant. He leaned into his mic with a voice dipped in syrupy sarcasm. Well, the youngest press secretary in history, he drawled. Tell me, Miss Leavitt, what's it like parroting every Trump tweet like a paid parrot in pearls? Snickers bubbled up from a few senators. A ripple of laughter danced across the room. The temperature dropped. The stakes soared. Leavitt didn't even blink. Miss Leavitt, Schiff continued, now circling like a shark, do you actually understand what you're doing here? Or are you just here for the cameras? A hush. Audible gasps. Every lens in the room zoomed in. Still, nothing from her. Just that calm, dagger-sharp stare. Perhaps, Schiff smirked, if you spent less time posting selfies and more time studying your role, you'd know how to answer a real question. Laughter. Applause. A few reporters raised eyebrows. In the observation gallery, President Trump sat stone-faced. But Melania? She leaned forward, an unreadable smile playing on her lips. And then, it happened. Leavitt turned. Slowly. Deliberately. Her voice sliced through the noise like a razor. I came here to talk about the truth, she said. Cool. Steady. But it seems some people here wouldn't recognize the truth even if it hit them in the face. Boom. The laughter stopped. The silence? Deafening. Schiff chuckled. The truth? From you? Oh, by all means entertain us. Leavitt's lips curved just slightly. Then she reached down, pulled a single document from her folder. Thick paper. Official seal. Her hands steady. I wasn't going to bring this up, she said, voice velvet-wrapped steel. But since we're being honest. She slid the paper across the table. Tapped it once. Your name, Senator Schiff, appears in a federal investigation regarding the misuse of $12 million in COVID relief funds. Time stopped. The room didn't gasp, it exploded. Reporters dropped pens. A senator swore under their breath. Phones lit up. Tweets flew. The camera zoomed in on Schiff's face, frozen. Pale. Eyes wide. Melania whispered, she actually did it. Schiff shifted in his seat. Hands twitching. No words. Order. Order, the chairman bellowed, slamming the gavel like a war drum. But the silence that followed was louder than the chaos. Schiff opened his mouth, then closed it. The tremor in his fingers betrayed him. Leavitt stood, holding up the document like a sword. This isn't just a piece of paper, she said, voice rising. It's a mirror. A mirror for every American watching. This is what happens, she continued, eyes scanning the stunned chamber when those in power mock instead of serve. When they think no one's watching. From the back, a young aide gasped, eyes wide, tears threatening. It was the moment she realized why she came to D.C. Suddenly, Schiff stood a shaky, furious. This is a fabrication, he snapped. Desperation. Lies. You're just a... No, Leavitt cut in, sharp and ice-cold. I'm just speaking the truth. Something you haven't done in a long, long time. Applause. Whispers. Murmurs. A storm was building. One that couldn't be stopped. CNN. Fox. MSNBC. Newsmax. Even the BBC cut to live coverage. Schiff grabbed his water glass, missed it. Grabbed again. His voice cracked. I demand a recess. Leavitt? She didn't even blink. She opened her folder again. Another sheet. Another bomb. This isn't just about you, Senator, she said calmly. These are bank transfer receipts. COVID relief money meant for struggling small businesses diverted to offshore shell accounts. Gasps. Real ones. A mic hit the floor. A senator buried their face in their hands. And Adam Schiff? He sat down. Hard. America was watching. And Caroline Leavitt? She was just getting started. Senator Adam Schiff sat with his head bowed as if the weight of the chamber had finally collapsed on his shoulders. The oxygen in the room felt thinner now. From the observation gallery, Melania Trump leaned close to her husband, eyes fixed on the woman below. She's not stopping, Melania whispered, her voice tinged with awe. President Trump didn't move. He stared ahead, jaw tight, like a man watching destiny unfold, something he'd known was coming. Something he'd been waiting for. Schiff raised his head slowly, skin pale, lips cracked. I didn't know about that money, he stammered, a tremor betraying him. Leavitt's voice was soft now. Almost merciful. But no less powerful. You knew, she said gently. You signed the authorization. You funneled the contracts. You hired your own family to manage the shell company. She looked at him, not with vengeance, but with disappointment. I didn't come here to humiliate you, Senator. I wasn't going to say any of this. She turned to the cameras, to the American people. But when you mocked me, you weren't just mocking me. You mocked every single American who still dares to believe in honesty. Schiff slumped deeper in his seat, the room swallowing him whole. He looked like a man unmasked, not by enemies but by truth itself. This wasn't politics anymore. This was justice. A reckoning. Across the country, silence fell. In a small town in Virginia, a mother of 3 clutched her chest and wept. She had lost her job during the pandemic. In a hospital break room in Oregon, a nurse stopped feeding a patient and raised the volume. In a greasy Nebraska diner, grizzled men stared open-mouthed at the screen. Forks paused midair. Coffee went cold. Leavitt stood straighter. Her voice grew stronger. You didn't steal from Wall Street, Senator. You didn't rob billionaires or break the backs of lobbyists. No. You stole from veterans. From single mothers. From truck drivers and factory workers and every soul who still had hope. Schiff tried to rise, but his knees buckled. An aide darted to catch him. Leavitt didn't gloat. She didn't raise her voice. She stepped forward, not as a bureaucrat, but as a woman who had had enough. I'm not saying this to destroy you, she said, tears glinting in her eyes. I'm saying this because the truth still matters. You tried to humiliate me. But all you did was remind me who I'm fighting for. A tear slipped down her cheek, unhidden, unashamed. And that single moment cracked the room wide open. Senator Daniel Brooks, who'd scoffed at her just hours before, wiped his eyes. His lips quivered. Across America, millions weren't just stunned, they were awakened. The clip went viral within minutes. Outside the Capitol, reporters swarmed like a tidal wave. Microphones thrust forward. Questions flew like bullets. Inside, Leavitt sat back down, serene in the eye of the storm. She whispered to her aide. I wasn't trying to win. I just wanted the truth to be heard. Up in the gallery, President Trump leaned toward Melania. Honey, he said, quiet but fierce, that's what a real leader looks like. She doesn't scream. She stands. On the floor, Schiff said nothing. Just sat blank-eyed. His aides clustered, sweating, phones buzzing, texts from donors, lawyers, and panicking allies. Leavitt didn't celebrate. There was no victory dance. Only the weight of what had been said. And what was to come. In the corridor, an elderly janitor paused. A Vietnam veteran, worn but proud. He stopped Leavitt and extended a calloused hand. Missy, he said, his voice gravel and pride. You did what I fought for in Nam. You spoke truth when it was hardest. She gripped his hand. Nodded. Quietly. This was never about praise. It was about waking up a nation. Back in her office, Leavitt's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Governors. Senators. Pastors. Factory workers. Nurses. And one call from a teacher in a small Idaho town. I showed your clip to my students, the teacher said, voice trembling. One of them cried. Said they finally saw someone stand up for people like her dad. He lost his job. Never saw a cent in relief. Leavitt's eyes blurred. She looked to her aide. Call the Justice Department, she said, voice iron. Open the investigation. Schiff's actions hurt real families. They deserve answers. The aide hesitated. You know this starts a war in Congress, right? Leavitt didn't blink. Then let it come. Outside, Schiff tried to escape through the back hall, but reporters were waiting. Senator, do you deny the documents? Did you misuse funds meant for pandemic victims? No comment, he barked, but his voice cracked, pure panic. He shoved past. Inside, the senators filed out in silence. But one stayed behind. Congresswoman Linda Brotney, young, bright-eyed, trembling. She approached Leavitt, voice barely a whisper. My father was a truck driver. He died during the pandemic. His company never got help. No relief. You just answered the question I've carried for 3 years. Leavitt didn't speak. She just opened her arms. Linda stepped in and sobbed. That night, while the Capitol glowed with scandal, Leavitt returned to her office. On her desk, a small, unmarked envelope. No name. Inside, a child's handwriting. Dear Miss Leavitt, my name is Lisa. I'm 10. My mom cried when she watched you on TV. She said you made her believe again. My dad used to say no one in Washington cares. But I think you do. Thank you for making my mom smile. She hasn't smiled in so long. Leavitt pressed the letter to her chest. Silent. Still. This wasn't about headlines. Or speeches. Or cable news. It was about Lisa. And every forgotten voice in every quiet town. She turned on the TV. Schiff was on the screen. Angry. Rattled. denying everything. Those documents are fake. This is political theater. But this time, America didn't believe him. Leavitt leaned back in her chair. The fire hadn't left her eyes. I didn't break the system, she whispered. I just held up a mirror. Outside, people gathered in the dark. Flags in hand, candles lit, signs that read, "Thank you, Caroline." As dusk fell over Washington, the old bells of a nearby chapel rang. Inside, a handful of citizens watched her speech on a small screen. One of them, Daniel, an aging miner from Montana, clutched the arm of his chair. His savings vanished with the relief funds. No one ever answered his letters. Now he wept. I thought no one would ever speak for us again. In her dim Capitol office, Caroline Leavitt reviewed every line of every document again, cross-checking, verifying, making sure not a single word had been exaggerated. Her phone buzzed. It was President Trump. "You okay, Caroline?" he asked. She took a breath, the Capitol glowing behind her. "Yeah," she said softly. "I'm just getting started." "Yes, Mr. President," Caroline Leavitt said, her voice steady but hushed. "I didn't mean for it to escalate like that." On the other end of the line, Trump chuckled, low and knowing. "That's exactly why it worked." He paused, the weight of Washington pressing between them. "Brace yourself, Caroline. They'll come after you now. All of them." Leavitt walked to the window. Below, a quiet storm brewed. Not of rage, but of conviction. "I know," she replied, unwavering. By sunrise, her face was everywhere. Not in smear campaigns or political takedowns, but on handmade placards taped to diner windows, on bus stop billboards, in videos posted by mothers clutching toddlers, in classrooms and community centers and small-town barbershops. A mother from Nevada posted, "My son asked me what courage looks like. I showed him Caroline Leavitt's clip." That quote spread like a flame across a dry prairie. And the now famous line, "Senator Schiff, you can mock my youth, but your name is in a federal investigation," echoed from high school classrooms in Texas to boardrooms in Los Angeles. America wasn't just watching. It was remembering what truth felt like. But inside the Capitol, panic had taken root. Schiff's inner circle was unraveling. His legal team scrambled. Donors ghosted. Supporters whispered and walked away. Then came the knock. Leavitt's top aide, breathless, stepped in. "Ma'am, oversight just called an emergency session. They want you there." Leavitt didn't hesitate. "Then let's go." The aide hesitated. "There's a chance Schiff hits back. Hard." She turned, her eyes firm, voice unwavering. "I'm not afraid of retaliation. I'm afraid of what happens if no one keeps telling the truth." Then her phone buzzed again. Her mother's name lit up the screen. "The kids saw you on TV," her mom whispered, voice trembling. "They said, you looked like a superhero." Leavitt's hands trembled. Not from fear, but from the weight of being seen. This was bigger now. Bigger than Schiff. Bigger than politics. It was about every American who'd been told to sit down, stay quiet, and take the loss. Outside the Capitol, crowds grew. But this wasn't a protest, it was a vigil. No chance. No anger. Just tears, hands held, and faces filled with something long forgotten. Hope. A woman named Nancy, who had driven all night from Wisconsin, stood among them clutching a photo, her husband, her 2 kids. She handed a folded envelope to a nearby Capitol aide. "Please, give this to Miss Leavitt." Minutes later, as Caroline made her way to the oversight chamber, a Capitol guard intercepted her and handed her the letter. She opened it. "Read slowly. My husband died after our small business was denied emergency relief. We later learned the funds went to shell corporations. Today, you reminded me that justice is still possible. Thank you for giving us back something we lost. Faith." Caroline froze. A quiet tear rolled down her cheek. Her aide leaned in. "They're ready." She nodded, dried her eyes, and walked through the doors. Inside, the chamber was ice-cold and tense. Schiff sat at the far end, rigid and ashen, fingers drumming nervously on the wood. Cameras clicked. Recorders rolled. Leavitt sat without notes. No script. Just truth. In the back, Nancy stood shoulder to shoulder with strangers. Her tears weren't of grief anymore. They were something deeper. Something healing. Senator Mary Poppin, chair of the committee, cleared her throat. Miss Leavitt, would you care to open with a statement? Caroline rose. No podium. No cards. Just the weight of millions on her shoulders. I didn't come here for spectacle, she began quietly. I came because Americans, real people, entrusted us with their hopes, their tax dollars, and their lives. And when their money vanished, so did the answers. She raised the letter from Nancy. This isn't a demand for punishment. It's a cry for truth. And we owe them that. Every single one. A few committee members dropped their gaze. Others shifted uncomfortably. Senator Patricia, a staunch Schiff ally, leaned forward, voice sharp. Miss Leavitt, are you making criminal accusations against a sitting senator? Caroline didn't blink. I'm not making accusations, she replied, crisp and clear. I'm submitting evidence. She lifted a sealed red folder from her bag. Thick, heavy, consequential. Inside, bank records, timestamp transfers, sworn testimonies from Schiff's own former aides. The funds were routed to companies that never existed before the pandemic. All of them controlled by his relatives. The room exploded. Gasps, murmurs, cameras zooming in, pens scratching. Schiff opened his mouth, but no words came out. Leavitt stayed calm. This isn't vengeance. This is accountability. If we ignore this, we send a message to every struggling family that their pain means nothing. Senator Robert wiped his eyes. Leavitt turned toward the gallery. I know what this could cost me, but I didn't take this role to be popular. I took it to make sure that people like Nancy, like Lisa, like the ones who feel forgotten are finally heard. The chamber went silent. Something in the air shifted. Heavy. Sacred. She didn't look like a staffer anymore. She looked like a voice America hadn't heard in years. Then Schiff stood, red-faced. His voice cracked. This is a coordinated smear. Lies. You have no legal standing. This is political theater. Leavitt didn't even turn her head. She simply handed the red folder to Chairwoman Evans. Evans opened it. Her face darkened. She passed it to the clerk. I move to initiate a formal investigation. Seconded, called Senator Jennifer Carter without hesitation. Schiff collapsed into his chair. This is madness. You're all insane. This is a witch hunt. Caroline finally turned, eyes calm. No, Senator, she said. This is what justice looks like. Outside, reporters surged forward. Cameras clicked. Headlines formed. Schiff stormed out, his steps echoing through the marble hall. But he wasn't running from Leavitt. He was running from the truth. The crowd had doubled, tripled. From every walk of life, people had come, young, old, black, white, rich, poor, united not by politics, but by belief. Signs waved gently. Thank you, Caroline. A woman named Ashley, from Idaho, lifted her daughter toward a nearby jumbotron playing the hearing live. That's her, she whispered. She's why you might have a better tomorrow. In a quiet ER in Georgia, Nurse Linda stood next to an elderly patient. The room was dim. The only sound was the beep of a heart monitor. She glanced at the screen above the bed and froze. It was Leavitt. She turned up the volume just in time to see the red folder handed off. Schiff's face. Leavitt's words. The nurse didn't speak. She just nodded. Because for the first time in a long time, something felt right. In a quiet Georgia hospital, Nurse Linda sat on the edge of an old hospital bed, her hands trembling. The glow from the TV flickered across her face. Her brother, his business had collapsed during the pandemic. Relief denied. The funds, they said, had dried up. Now she knew that wasn't the truth. Not the real one. Beside her, a frail elderly patient stirred, eyes fixed on the screen. That young woman, he whispered, barely audible. She's saying what we've all been thinking. Linda wiped her cheek, nodding. She is. Her tears didn't come from bitterness. but from release. As the steady beep of machines filled the silence, hope entered the room like a breeze through a cracked window. She pulled out her phone, typed one word, and sent it to her sister. Watch. Back in Washington, Leavitt sat alone in her office after hanging up with the president. Her gaze drifted toward the window. The crowd outside had grown calm, steady, present. Not angry, just there. She whispered to herself, voice almost too soft to hear. If the people matter, if truth matters, we don't back down. Trump's voice still echoed in her ears. America needed something real, and you gave it to them. She didn't feel heroic. She felt burdened. But for the first time, the burden felt worth it. Because someone had finally stood where most only dared to watch. All across the country, something shifted. In a smoky Louisiana diner, an old man with cracked hands stood quietly and said to no one in particular, "That Caroline girl. She's got the heart of a soldier." On a wind-blown Oregon farm, a family, divided by politics for years, watched her replay in silence, and cried together for the first time in a long time. In classrooms, teachers paused their lessons. In garages, truck drivers turned up the radios. In churches, sermons changed mid-sentence. And everywhere, Leavitt's words echoed like a national heartbeat. "Senator Schiff, you can mock my youth, but your name is in a federal investigation over $12 million in misused COVID relief funds." It wasn't about Schiff anymore. It was about every overlooked worker, every exhausted mother, every veteran left behind, every young person unsure if their voice mattered at all. Caroline sat at her desk, hands clasped tightly, the silence around her feeling sacred. Outside her door, the world still moved. But inside, she sat with the weight of every letter, every name, every untold story. A janitor passed by Mr. Stephen, slow but steady. He paused in the doorway. She stood, extended her hand. "Thank you," she said simply. He smiled, eyes glassy. "No, Miss Leavitt. Thank you for reminding us we're still people." That evening, cities pulsed with headlines. Social feeds flooded with hashtags. But in Leavitt's office, the noise fell away. And another envelope appeared, no return address. Just her name, written in soft blue ink. She opened it with care. Inside, a photo. A soldier. Young. Standing tall in uniform, a baby in his arms. And a letter handwritten, fragile but firm. "Miss Leavitt, my husband died waiting for the aid your opponent helped block. He served this country with pride. But the system lost our paperwork. We later learned that millions went to fake companies. Watching you today, I finally felt seen. Heard. My husband was gone, but somehow you gave him back his dignity. Please don't stop." Caroline folded the letter as if it were sacred scripture. She held the photo to her chest. This was no longer a press moment. No longer political. It was personal. It was owed. Outside the Capitol, the people kept coming. Not with megaphones, but with presence. One of them was Anthony, a 10-year-old in a wheelchair. A cancer survivor from rural Nevada. His mother had driven through the night to get him there. He clutched a hand-drawn sign in his lap. "My hospital almost closed. Thank you for standing up." A passing news crew caught him on camera. His sign. His smile. The clip lit up the internet. By dawn, Anthony was on every news feed in America. Inside, an aide knocked on Leavitt's door. "Ma'am, there's a boy out front. His name's Anthony. His sign's gone viral." Caroline stood up. "Take me to him." She stepped through the security gates. No podium. No prepared remarks. She walked straight to Anthony. Kneeling beside his chair, she looked into his eyes. "You're the reason I fight," she said, voice full. "You're the brave one, Anthony." He beamed up at her. "You didn't scream," he said. "You just told the truth." She hugged him tight. Cameras clicked, but the moment was quiet. Sacred. By sunset, the photo of Leavitt holding Anthony's hand was framed on living room mantels, taped to classroom walls, tucked into church bulletins. That night, the Senate reconvened. The tone had shifted. Schiff's seat? Vacant. Leavitt entered slowly. No suit jacket. Just an American flag pin and a plain folder. The room rose to its feet, not out of duty, but respect. She sat quietly. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Senator Susan leaned forward. "Miss Leavitt, would you like to speak?" Caroline rose. Her voice didn't boom. It didn't need to. "I didn't come to take anyone down," she said. "I came to speak for those who have no one left to speak for them." She paused, took a breath. "I'm not proud of the pain this process exposed. But I'm proud that for once this chamber chose honesty. Then she did something unexpected. She sat down and said nothing. For 60 seconds she let silence do what speeches couldn't. Silence for the unheard. And in that stillness, something cracked open inside the room. Even the most hardened senators sat straighter. Listen deeper. Because sometimes what's not said speaks loudest. The next morning, long before the sun rose, a man arrived at the Capitol. He was old. His jacket frayed. His boots worn thin. His name was Christopher, a Vietnam veteran. In his hands, a folded American flag. He didn't ask for attention. He just stood on the steps, watching the building like a guardian of memory. Inside, Leavitt read through more letters, more lives. An aide stepped in. "Ma'am, there's a veteran outside. No press. No photos. He just wants a moment." She stood. Walked out. Christopher stood tall. As she approached, he gave a crisp, deliberate salute. She returned it. His voice broke as he spoke. "My brother didn't survive the pandemic. His business drowned. The system blamed technical errors. But it wasn't error. It was theft." He handed her the flag. This was his. He served too. And today, I believe you're doing the same. Leavitt's breath caught in her throat. "I can't accept this," she said softly. He placed it in her hands anyway. "You already did. The day you stood up, for people no one else would." Christopher stood tall, his eyes glassy, hands still on his heart. "You already did," he said softly. "You spoke for the ones who can't anymore." Caroline Leavitt pressed the folded flag to her chest, overcome. Her vision blurred. But she didn't look away. The Capitol fell silent again, not with tension, but with something older. Something sacred. Respect. She returned to the hearing room, the flag still in her grasp. She didn't walk quickly. She walked with purpose. Schiff's seat, still empty. But America, watching closer than ever. She stepped toward the podium, then paused. Her voice quiet but cutting through the silence. "I have one last file." A yellow envelope was raised in her hand. But this one didn't shake. This one's not just numbers. It's not only about stolen dollars. It's about destroyed lives. And a cover-up deeper than we imagined. The room shifted. Senators murmured. Chair Mary Poppin called for order with a firm tap of her gavel. Leavitt peeled back the envelope. Out came call logs. Emails. Testimonies from inside. Names blacked out. Words underlined. Pain printed plainly. She stared into the lens of the nearest camera. Not for drama, but because she knew millions were watching. This evidence shows Senator Schiff's office intentionally delayed federal relief to specific districts because of how they voted. The words hit like lightning. Gasps rippled through the chamber. A senator rose to his feet. "That's criminal misconduct." Leavitt nodded. She didn't flinch. "It is. And it happened. I don't need to yell. I just need the truth to breathe." She laid the file on the desk like a verdict and stepped away. That moment, not the insults, not the headlines, was the one that pierced deepest. Not anger, not spectacle. Truth. The reaction wasn't political. It was personal. In Ohio, a woman in a nursing home wept, her hand trembling against the screen. In Texas, a lunch lady clutched her apron, whispering, "They lied to us." In Maine, a fireman turned off the engine, leaned against the door, and cried. On dusty roads and front porches, in cluttered break rooms and quiet living rooms, people weren't watching politics. They were watching a mirror, one that finally reflected them. A man in Missouri sank to his knees in his kitchen, face buried in his hands. "My dad begged for help, and no one came. But now," someone finally said it out loud. In Seattle, a teacher paused the video replay. No one in the classroom looked away. At last, silence had turned into something else. Recognition. Leavitt's testimony wasn't perfect. It wasn't polished. That's why it mattered. No showmanship. No spin. Just a young woman with everything to lose, and a nation behind her. That night, as the sun dipped low over Washington, a young girl in Tucson closed her diary and whispered, "Someday, I want to be that brave." Her father, once cynical, smiled quietly, for the first time in years. Schiff's chair remained unoccupied, cold, hollow, a seat that now looked more like a warning than a title. Across newsrooms, one line echoed again and again. deliberate obstruction of emergency relief, political targeting, abuse of power during national crisis, unforgivable. Back inside the Capitol, the Ethics Committee called an emergency vote. But the woman at the center of the storm? She wasn't there. Caroline was at a hospital, visiting someone unexpected. Nancy, the woman who had sent her husband's photo. She was resting after a candlelight vigil. The air was heavy with incense and exhaustion. But her son, Matthew, sat beside her bed, coloring. He looked up as Caroline entered. "You're the one who told the truth," he said quietly. Caroline knelt beside him, her voice gentle. "I just said what your mom already knew." He beamed and handed her a red crayon. "Keep it, in case you need to color the truth again." Her hand closed around it. And for the second time in one day, Caroline Leavitt cried. Not for the fight, but for what she was fighting for. Back at the Capitol, the chamber was packed. The air buzzed. Not with politics, but with accountability. Senator Mary Poppin, grave and composed, stood and addressed the room. Based on verified testimony and supporting documentation from federal investigators, this committee will move forward with formal charges against Senator Adam Schiff for abuse of power and obstruction of emergency relief distribution. Gasps. Some cheers. Mostly stillness. She continued, "And we recognize the extraordinary moral courage of Miss Caroline Leavitt for her discipline, clarity, and putting principle above politics." At that moment, Leavitt re-entered. No entrance music. No announcement. She simply was there. And senators, even those who once rolled their eyes at her, rose to their feet. A rare applause followed. Not loud but steady. Not partisan. Grateful. Outside, the news spread like thunder breaking through rain clouds. People didn't cry for Schiff. They cried because truth had finally been told. As she exited the building, Mr. Stephen, the Capitol janitor, stood near the hallway's edge. He leaned in close, voice low. "You didn't just speak for us," he said. "You reminded us that decency still walks these halls." Caroline placed her hand over her heart, nodded. Then she walked on. That evening, bells rang in small towns. Not for grief, but for renewal. In Nebraska, families gathered for dinner and bowed their heads to pray not for survival, but in thanks. In Idaho, farmers stopped mid-harvest, looked to the sky, and quietly raised their flags. In Georgia, churches lit candles, not for mourning, but for gratitude. Because in one single day, truth was no longer a whisper. It had become a shout across a wounded nation. Back in her office, Caroline sat alone. No advisors, no press, just the red crayon, and a blank notebook. She opened it and wrote one word. Remember. She didn't care for hashtags or history books. She cared about keeping a promise. A promise made in a single sentence that now lived in millions of hearts. Senator Schiff, you can mock my youth, but your name is in a federal investigation regarding $12 million in misused COVID relief funds. It wasn't a statement. It was a signal, a line in the sand. It didn't just bring down a man. It awakened a country. As night fell over Washington, the air was clearer. Not perfect, but purer. Somewhere, a soldier's photo rested on a mantle. Somewhere, a widow folded a letter with peace in her heart. Somewhere, a young girl reached for her journal and wrote, "Today, America remembered who it was." And across 50 states, in silence or in song, a nation exhaled. Because for the first time in years, someone didn't spin the truth. She carried it. Caroline Leavitt stood at the White House podium, framed by flashbulbs and microphones. The room was hushed, every camera focused, every pen stilled. She held a single sheet of paper, folded it with care. Her voice, when it came, was soft, but unshakable. The truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs someone brave enough to whisper it. She paused, looked across the crowd of reporters, and said plainly, "I didn't come forward out of hatred for Senator Schiff. I came forward because silence is suffocating this country. I spoke for the forgotten towns, the overworked nurses, the truckers, the widows, the children who only have hope left to hold. a gentle breath. And if I had to do it again, I would. That single moment was broadcast across the globe. Her words crossed borders, languages, oceans. Not to divide, but to restore. That night, Leavitt returned to the capital. No motorcade, no fanfare, just quiet footsteps echoing in the marble halls. She passed Schiff's abandoned seat and stopped. She looked at it, not with anger, but with clarity. "This used to be a throne of arrogance," she whispered. Then she walked on. Just outside the chamber, a familiar face appeared. Anthony, the boy from Nevada, in his wheelchair. His mother stood behind him, holding something folded and bright. Caroline knelt beside him. Anthony handed her a drawing. It showed her standing atop a tall mountain. Below her, small stick figures raised signs that read, "Truth, Hope, My Dad, My Town, Justice." Leavitt blinked away the tears. "I didn't climb that mountain alone," she said. "You all carried me." Anthony smiled up at her. "You never yelled. You just stood strong." She wrapped him in a hug, gentle, steady, then rose and looked toward the Capitol dome, glowing in the night sky. "I didn't come here to win," she whispered. "I came to serve." The next morning, she was gone from D.C. back home in Virginia. No cameras, no press briefings, just her parents, a porch swing, and a quiet wind moving through the trees. She sat beneath the stars, the crayon Anthony had given her resting on the table beside a notebook. Then a knock. It was Nancy, the widow, with her son, Matthew, by her side. "I needed to say thank you. In person," Nancy said softly. Caroline shook her head. "I didn't do anything special." Nancy reached out, laying a hand over hers. "You gave a grieving country its voice back." Matthew looked up, wide-eyed. "You made my mom believe again." And at that, Caroline broke. Not from weakness, but from the weight of every letter, every hug, every unspoken thank you from the unseen. Because she had carried them, quietly, completely, into the heart of power. And she had spoken not for herself, but for them. Across the nation, her words rippled. In a Kentucky cafe, a waitress paused mid-shift, watching the replay on a dusty television, tears tracing her cheeks. In a Wisconsin factory, workers crowded around a phone, passing it between greasy hands, nodding silently. In a Florida classroom, Miss Kimberly, a fourth-grade teacher, played the clip for her students. "What does courage mean?" she asked. A small boy raised his hand. "It's Miss Caroline, because she wasn't scared." On social media, the hashtags wouldn't stop. Hashtag Caroline Truth and hashtag Leavitt Speaks. But Leavitt didn't chase the spotlight. She returned to her job, briefing the press, serving the administration. But something had shifted. She kept Matthew's red crayon on her desk, nestled beside her notes, a quiet reminder of why she stood. President Trump, in a post, called her the flame of truth. Meanwhile, the Senate Ethics Committee moved quickly, its investigation into Schiff gaining momentum. Headlines read, "Let its evidence ignites justice." But for Caroline, justice was never the prize. It was the restoration of something much bigger. In a church tucked deep in rural Georgia, a pastor read aloud a letter from a congregant. "I thought I'd lost my faith in people, but this week I found it again." In Montana, a group of high school students taped Leavitt's photo to the gym wall. Above it, in bold letters, "Thank you for fighting for U.S." And back in Washington, crowds still gathered outside the Capitol. No rage, no riots, just stillness. People holding candles. Photos of loved ones. Quiet gratitude. Among them, Ashley, a mother from Arizona, held up a picture of her son, lost to COVID. "Caroline didn't just speak for me," she told a reporter. She listened. Caroline knew the fight wasn't over. She knew the attacks would come, the spin, the smears, the doubt. But she wasn't afraid. She had seen truth win, even for just a moment. She had stood for Anthony, for Matthew, for Nancy, for Christopher, for every invisible name on every forgotten page. The story of Caroline Leavitt's confrontation with Adam Schiff is more than a political moment. It's a mirror held up to a fractured country. It's a reminder of what honesty and courage still look like when power tries to silence them. Caroline didn't take the stage for praise. She rose to defend the ones no one sees. The child with the coloring book, The farmer who buried his brother. The teacher explaining hope to her students. And what did she teach us? That truth, spoken with grace and purpose, can still break through the noise. That integrity, even whispered, is louder than any microphone. That one person standing quietly with evidence, compassion, and a red crayon can change a nation's course. If you felt forgotten, if you've wondered whether honesty still matters. If you've ever wanted to stand up but felt too small. Remember Caroline. And speak. Softly, bravely, and with purpose. If this story moved you, subscribe to hear more stories that inspire. More voices like Caroline's. More moments that remind us truth still matters. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next chapter.